The dream was long and strangely ambiguous, and when I finally woke up, I felt utterly drained. My legs ached as if I'd walked dozens of kilometers, and when I tried to stand, I couldn't even stay upright. What on earth was going on? It was just a wildly audacious dream, wasn't it? How come I felt like I'd been completely emptied out? It wasn't until I glanced down at my naked legs that I realized I was completely naked. At first, I froze in shock. Then I grabbed a mirror and took a look. Dark red marks were etched all over my neck, chest, and even my arms. There was also a tiny wound on my lip, as if something had bitten me. Even a fool could see what had happened. But wait, this was clearly just a wild, absurd dream. Yet everything Evan had done to me in the dream had somehow become real. The whole thing hit me so suddenly that I was mortified. I just wanted to find a crack in the ground and crawl right into it. Although I wanted his Dragon King's power just to save my life, now that it's actually happened, recalling my own bold and uninhibited behavior from the dream makes me can't help but feel anxious again. Will Evan think I'm too frivolous? Just thinking about this, I froze once more. How come I'm suddenly concerned about what he thinks of me? I quickly grabbed some clean clothes and rushed into the bathroom. Only after I'd tidied myself up did I dare to step out. But my walking posture was really weird, almost like a crab. Mom was preparing breakfast and glanced at me briefly before asking, "Lila, what's wrong with your leg?" I obediently sat down at the dining table, lowered my head, and whispered softly, "I twisted my ankle when I got up." Mom gave me a reproachful look and said, "Watch where you're going when you walk. And in the middle of summer, you're covering your neck so tightly. Aren't you hot?" I buried my head even lower and mumbled, "Mosquitoes bit me all over and left huge welts. It's so embarrassing, so I'm using my collar to cover up." "Didn't you know there's mosquito repellent around?" Mom sighed helplessly. "I'll definitely remember next time." Just thinking about last night made my face burn with embarrassment. But now wasn't the time to be shy. I had to hurry and find the evil spirit that had harmed Dad, so he could wake up. After breakfast, Mom went into his room to keep watch over him. Ever since Dad had fallen ill, she'd been doing this every single day, sitting by his bedside, talking to him, hoping he'd hear her. Deep down, I knew that unless we got rid of that evil spirit, Dad would never come back to consciousness. I pulled out the scale Evan had given me last night. He'd said it could guide me to my target. But how exactly was I supposed to find it? Before I could even finish thinking, a thin, white thread suddenly shot out from the scale, winding its way off into the distance. My heart skipped a beat. Could this really be the guidance Evan had talked about? I sprang to my feet and started chasing after it. The thread flew slowly, yet it kept going without stopping. Until suddenly, it came to a halt right beside a person who was smiling warmly at me, completely oblivious to the thread. "Lila dear, on such a bright, sunny day, where are you off to?" she asked. This woman was Mrs. Martha, a resident of our little town, and one of its most unfortunate souls. She'd lost her husband in middle age and her son in old age, leaving her with only her grandson, Tommy, to rely on. The townspeople were all kind-hearted. Whenever her family faced hardship, everyone was quick to lend a hand. Yet somehow, Evan's guiding thread had come to rest precisely by this gentle old lady's side. Could it be that she was the one who'd harmed my dad? But no matter how I looked at her, Mrs. Martha seemed utterly ordinary. How could any evil spirit dare venture out into the blazing sun like that? I gave her a suspicious glance and asked, "Mrs. Martha, where exactly are you headed?" Mrs. Martha glanced up and down my figure, then smiled warmly and said, "Tommy's been sick, so I'm heading over to the herbalist in the next town to pick up some medicine for him. Tommy is 12 years old and about to start middle school. He's sensible and well-behaved. Everyone in town likes him. I'd better not talk to you any longer. I've got to hurry off before the sun gets even hotter," Mrs. Martha said, quickening her pace. "All right, take care on your way," I replied promptly, nodding vigorously. After Mrs. Martha had walked away, the thread finally resumed its movement, but this time it headed straight toward her house, flying into the yard before coming to a sudden halt. It seemed that the evil spirit responsible for harming Dad was hiding right here. I stared at the tightly shut gate, torn between hesitation. Should I go in or not? After pondering for a few seconds, I made up my mind and turned around. Better safe than sorry. Never be curious, never act alone, and never enter a house you know is dangerous. Evan only said to drop some blood onto the scales once we found them. He didn't mention anything else. Just to be on the safe side, I decided to try dropping some blood first. The moment I pricked my finger, the sharp pain made me wince. After letting a drop of blood fall onto the scales, I turned to leave for a while. But just as I did, I nearly gonged into someone's arms. Mrs. Martha's wrinkled face was suddenly so close that my breath froze instantly. Mrs. Martha? Weren't you at the herbalist place? How come you're back so soon? I blurted out in surprise. My heart was already in chaos. There was no way she could have returned so quickly. Maybe she hadn't left at all and had been following me all along. Cold sweat immediately broke out on the back of my neck. The kindness on Mrs. Martha's face vanished without a trace. Her smile was forced and insincere as she stared at me intently. Lila dear, what are you doing loitering around my doorstep? Her voice was chilling, radiating an icy chill. At the same time, the courtyard gate behind me opened silently. Since you're so interested in my home, go on in then. Mrs. Martha's face suddenly twisted into a ferocious grimace. I'd never imagined an elderly woman could possess such strength. She grabbed me and shoved me into the yard, and the gate slammed shut with a loud bang, locking behind me. I crashed heavily onto the ground, already feeling weak and sore all over. The impact sent stars dancing before my eyes. The yard was thick with the pungent smell of blood, mixed with a sickening stench of rotting flesh. Mrs. Martha, what are you trying to do? I snapped angrily. Mrs. Martha glared at me darkly. Humph! You think I can't see that half-empty thread? Good thing I kept an eye on you, otherwise you'd have ruined my whole plan. My heart sank. She could actually see that thread? Evan really pulled one over on me this time. What plan are you talking about? I pressed, my nose already stinging from the foul odor. Mrs. Martha didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a rooster with a broken leg from the chicken coop and gave a sinister laugh. Since you've practically handed yourself right to me, don't blame me for being ruthless. As long as Tommy comes back, I'll do absolutely anything. Tommy's all I've got left. I can't afford to let anything happen to him again. I'd originally planned to wait a bit before taking action against you, but who would have thought you'd come to me so willingly? This is truly heaven sent. At this moment, there wasn't a trace of kindness left in Mrs. Martha's eyes. The way she was staring at me was exactly the same as Silas's. I struggled desperately to escape, but she held on tight, dragging me forcefully into the house. I was frantic and couldn't break free. Evan only said to drip blood onto the scales, but what happens after that? Mrs. Martha's house was far more isolated than mine. There weren't any neighbors anywhere nearby. Even if I screamed until my voice was hoarse, no one would ever hear me. She threw me into a room, and as soon as I stepped inside, the sight before me sent shivers down my spine. A decomposing corpse lay on the bed, covered in yellowish fluid. Maggots wriggled around in the rotting flesh, and the stench was so overpowering it nearly made me gag. Though the body was already in advanced decay, I could still vaguely recognize its shape. It was Tommy, Mrs. Martha's grandson. Tommy had been dead for ages, his body so utterly rotten it was almost unrecognizable. What Mrs. Martha had said earlier about going to fetch medicine was nothing but a lie. Was she insane? Mrs. Martha, I demanded angrily, did you do this to my dad? Mrs. Martha clutched the severed-legged rooster tightly in her hand. She glanced at Tommy lying on the bed, then at the chicken in her hand, and stared at me with a chilling, cold gaze. Now your dad's life is tied to this chicken's, she said. If I snap its neck, your dad will die. If you don't want him to die, just cooperate with me. Cooperate with you for what? Mrs. Martha's gaze suddenly softened, filled with tenderness and compassion, as she looked down at the corpse on the bed. Cooperate with me to bring Tommy back to life. I was utterly stunned. But Tommy's already dead. His body's rotted away. How could he possibly be brought back? My words seemed to strike a nerve in her. Suddenly she bellowed, He's not dead. The The great immortal said it's possible to revive him, as long as you cooperate. I've had this all planned out, she continued, her voice dripping with cold calculation. I'd use your dad's broken leg to lure you back here. If you refuse, I'll threaten to take your dad's life. You'll have no choice but to agree. I stared at Mrs. Martha, my heart trembling violently. So it had all been her elaborate scheme? How exactly am I supposed to cooperate? I forced myself to stay calm, quickly scanning the room with my eyes. All the windows were nailed shut with wooden planks. If I wanted to escape, I'd first have to deal with Mrs. Martha right in front of me. Mrs. Martha was absolutely certain I wouldn't escape, staring at me like a hungry wolf. It's simple. You just have to cut out your heart's most precious piece and give it to Tommy, and he'll come back to life. Help me out? Quickly, just a moment. Heart's most precious piece? That's asking for my life. Even Tang Monk's flesh couldn't bring the dead back to life, let alone me, an ordinary person. Mrs. Martha, you've been fooled by a charlatan. I'm just an ordinary guy. My heart's most precious piece is completely useless. She interrupted me impatiently, and somehow she'd already pulled out a sharp kitchen knife, holding it poised above the rooster's neck. If you refuse to cut out your heart's most precious piece, I'll slit its throat right here. No, I cried in alarm. I'll do it, I promise. Mrs. Martha let out a cold snort, then grabbed the rooster and walked up to me, raising the knife high above its head. Inside, I cursed silently. Either way, I'm dead, but if I resist, there's still a sliver of hope left. Seeing that I wasn't backing away, her guard relaxed a bit, and her grip on the chicken loosened slightly. Her full attention was now focused on the kitchen knife, and on me. Just as she raised the knife, I seized the perfect moment, lowered my head, and slammed into her waist with all my might. She'd never expected me to fight back. Caught off guard, the rooster flapped its wings, broke free from her grasp, and bolted out the door. I pinned Mrs. Martha down, reaching out to snatch the knife from her hand, but though she had tremendous strength, her body wasn't nearly as nimble as mine. With every ounce of effort, I was about to wrest the knife away from her. But just then, Mrs. Martha suddenly froze, staring blankly behind me with a strange smile spreading across her face. At the same time, I heard a drip-drip sound, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of something dripping onto the floor, yellow, putrid liquid, exactly the same one I'd seen earlier beside the corpse. Could it be that the corpse had risen? Damn it! I tried to get up, but Mrs. Martha suddenly clung to me tightly, her arms like dried twigs squeezing the breath out of me. Tommy, do it! Pluck out her heart, and you'll live. Tommy's corpse was already unrecognizable. Rotting flesh and shattered bones tumbled down with his every movement, making my pupils contract sharply. He raised his hand, revealing white bones, and reached toward my chest. Just as his hand was about to touch me, a sudden burst of silver light erupted from my body. A ghostly dragon-shaped figure materialized, enveloping me completely. The dragon's shadow violently tore apart the decaying corpse. There was a dull thud, plop, as the corpse slammed into the wall, instantly disintegrating into a pile of minced meat and scattered bones. Seeing the broken remains, Mrs. Martha's face turned livid with rage. Ignoring me completely, she scrambled on all fours toward the corpse, frantically clawing at the fragments of flesh and bone, but no matter how hard she tried, she could never put it back together again. Taking advantage of the moment when she was in a state of utter collapse, I dashed to the corner of the wall, scooped up that one-legged rooster, and bolted out the door. This chicken was a matter of life and death for Dad. I simply couldn't afford to lose it. Mrs. Martha was still immersed in her grief, and by the time I ran out of the house, she hadn't even chased after me. As I slammed the door shut behind me, just as I burst through the small courtyard gate, I jong into a solid chest. If it hadn't been for that man's lightning-fast reflexes and his quick embrace, I probably would have been thrown backward and landed on the ground. A crisp, fresh scent, like mountain spring water, washed over me. When I looked up, I saw it was Evan Thorne. He'd arrived at absolutely the perfect moment, neither earlier nor later, but precisely when I was making my escape. I even began to suspect he'd done it on purpose. After a brief moment of stunned silence, my face instantly turned as red as a cooked shrimp, and those images from last night, the flushed cheeks and racing heart, flooded back into my mind all over again. Why are you only showing up now? I lowered my head and mumbled softly. I didn't dare look at his expression, afraid of hearing mockery. But instead of the expected sarcasm, a light chuckle sounded above me. You're saying it's my fault for being late? I jerked my head up, eyes wide, and quickly explained, No. That's not what I meant. If I hadn't escaped just now, I probably would have been dead. Evan's lips curved ever so slightly into a faint smile as he studied me with keen interest. His gaze lingered first on my lips, then slowly slid down to my neck and chest. His look sent shivers running down my spine. You already have the Dragon King's power protecting you. You're not that easy to kill. As he said Dragon King's power, his eyes took on a peculiar depth. The Dragon King's power. Just thinking about how I'd come to possess such power made me want to die right there and then. Before I could say anything, he went on. Back in a room just now, the dragon shadow that appeared around you, it was the Dragon King's power manifesting itself. Ordinary evil spirits simply couldn't harm you. I nodded, surprised to find that it was this very thing that had been protecting me all along. So, does that mean Evan and I've already become something like a married couple? But then I hesitated. After all, I'm human, and he's a Dragon King. We're completely different species. Can we really be together? Evan, I called out softly. He looked down at me, his eyes meeting mine. I tightened my grip on the rooster's hand, but as soon as I felt his cool, unflinching gaze upon me, all the courage I'd mustered just seemed to deflate in an instant. No, nothing, I said quickly. Evan merely narrowed his eyes slightly, not pressing further, but I knew full well he'd guessed exactly what I'd been about to ask. Actually, what I wanted to know was, after last night, what exactly are we now? Yet I didn't dare speak up, and he didn't mention it either, maintaining a perfectly serious demeanor as if nothing had happened last night at all. Hurry up and take the rooster home. Put it by your father's bedside. Evan broke the silence. The soul that was taken from your father will return to his body on its own. I knew this wasn't the time for sentimentality, so I nodded and quickly grabbed the rooster, dashing home. When Mom saw me sprinting back, clutching a rooster with a broken leg, she was just about to ask something, but I immediately jumped in and said, Mom, don't ask yet. I'll explain everything later. Evan followed closely behind me, but Mom seemed completely oblivious to his presence. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to ask further. I placed the rooster by Dad's bedside. It lay quietly and obediently, not moving a muscle. Evan stood beside me, extending his slender hand and gently brushing it over both the rooster's head and Dad's forehead. Then a tiny spark of light shot out from the rooster's head and flew straight into the center of Dad's brow. Almost instantly, Dad's eyelashes twitched, though he didn't wake up right away. Evan said that Dad's spirit needs time to adjust and should be awake by dark. Hearing this, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Dad was okay, and now I had the Dragon King's power to protect me. Everything seemed to be getting better, but Evan's next words hit me like a bolt from the blue. He followed me back to my room and sat down at the edge of my bed. On the bed still lay the clothes I'd changed out of last night, all torn and ripped beyond recognition. No wonder last night had been so wild. Looking at Evan sitting there like an old man, I didn't know whether to stand or sit. Why are you being so stiff? Weren't you pretty bold last night? Evan raised an eyebrow, his voice cool and detached. I scratched my head and said hesitantly, Last night, I thought it was just a dream, which is why I dared to do those things. At that point, I froze. What on earth was I supposed to say? We've only known each other for 2 or 3 days, and we've spent together just a few hours, but you're already kissing him senseless? What's he going to think of me? What did you say? Be clear, Evan said with a smirk that sent shivers down my spine. Only a villain would smile like that. I fidgeted nervously, twisting the hem of my shirt until the fabric was all wrinkled and crumpled. Closing my eyes in resignation, I muttered, I'll take responsibility. It was my initiative. I should be the one to take charge. Take responsibility. Evan laughed coldly, as if I'd just told him the biggest joke in the world. You think you're qualified to take responsibility for me? My mouth went utterly dry in an instant. That remark hit me like a knife to the heart. He saw me as nothing more than an ordinary person, too lowly and unworthy even to be held accountable. Well, that suited me just fine. Taking a deep breath, I raised my head and asked, if I'm not worthy of taking responsibility, does that mean I'll never be able to date or marry anyone else? I really care about this. I'm just an ordinary person, and all I want is an ordinary life. As soon as I finished saying that, despite it being the height of summer, the room's temperature suddenly plummeted, sending a chill through me that made me shiver. When I looked up, Evan's face had gone completely grim. The red shirt made his complexion look even colder, and his bare, pale ankles stood out starkly, each ankle adorned with 2 golden anklets. Judging by their thickness and luster, I couldn't help but wonder, were these anklets made entirely of pure gold? Oh well, I didn't dare ask, not out of curiosity, but out of sheer fear. I stared at him nervously, both eager and terrified of what he'd say. My heart was pounding so fast it felt like a drumbeat. If you're dying to end your life, go ahead, Evan said with a half-smile, his voice icy and cutting. I was left speechless. His attitude was nothing short of toxic, neither proactive nor rejecting, yet utterly irresponsible. I'm so frustrated. But last night it was really me who took the initiative, so maybe I didn't come out too badly after all. Not only did I get the Dragon King's power, but his physique seems pretty impressive, too. Just as I was lost in these wild thoughts, Evan spoke again. Lila, don't think that having my Dragon King's power means you're safe and sound. This power can only protect you for a while. It can't keep you safe for a lifetime. If you want to survive, you'll have to find the soul you've lost. Otherwise, you'll remain trapped in eternal slumber, never to be reborn. A person with an incomplete soul won't even be allowed into the underworld after death, he said, sending a chill straight through me. I'd been so relieved, thinking that with the Dragon King's power, I'd finally be safe, but now I realized I'd jumped the gun way too soon. Was it Silas who took my missing soul? I asked. Evan nodded without hesitation. As far as we can tell, it really was him. Why does he want my soul? Did I offend him in a past life? Evan just gave me a faint, sidelong glance without saying a word. It seemed this was going to be tricky. I'd rather never see Silas again in this lifetime, yet my very soul happened to be in his hands. Just then, Mom pushed open the door and came in. The instant she sat down beside me, Evan's red coat flashed briefly, and his figure shot out the window. Seeing Mom's hesitant expression, I knew exactly what she was about to ask. I told her about everything that had happened, half truth and half lie, deliberately leaving out the most dangerous part. After hearing my story, Mom was utterly shocked. She simply couldn't believe that the usually kind Mrs. Martha would ever do something like this. Unable to let it go, she immediately gathered several caring neighbors from town and headed toward Mrs. Martha's house. I followed right behind them. When our group arrived in force, the gate of Mrs. Martha's yard was tightly shut. Wang Shu, a strong man from town, kicked it open in one swift motion. As soon as the door flew open, a pungent, foul stench hit us full in the face, and several people immediately began to gag and vomit. My mom, being bold and both angry and anxious, was the first to rush into the house, with me close behind. The sight before us left us all utterly stunned. Lying in the room were 2 corpses, Tommy's and Mrs. Martha's. Tommy's body was already in an even more advanced state of decomposition. Though Mrs. Martha's looked somewhat better, it had begun leaking decaying fluids and teeming with maggots. I felt both shocked and sickened. Just hours ago, Mrs. Martha had been alive and well. How could she suddenly have turned into a corpse that had been dead for who knows how long? Hurry! Go fetch Mr. Gordon, shouted the neighbor who had just entered behind us. Whenever there was a funeral or an unusual occurrence in town, they'd always call Mr. Gordon to handle it. My mom and I exchanged a glance, but didn't say a word. Evan appeared silently beside me, his voice low and solemn. Actually, the Mrs. Martha you met earlier, she's been dead for a long time now. What's been keeping her going all along was nothing more than an obsessive fixation.